He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You'll never find anyone who wants a woman with a child." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just smiled. What he didn't know was that silence wasn't surrender. It was survival. That was 3 years ago. And today, he stood at the back of a sunlit church, dressed in black like he was attending a funeral. My wedding. Uninvited. Unapologetic. Unmoving. He stared at the man standing at the altar, the one holding my daughter's tiny hand, helping her adjust the flower crown she'd carefully chosen. That man, the one who smiled at her like she was his own, was everything my ex swore I would never find. And as I took my first step down the aisle, I didn't look at the man in the back. I looked at the future waiting for me in the front. My name is Sienna Ray. I'm a mother, a survivor, and today I became a wife. But before you see me standing in a white dress with joy in my eyes, you need to know what it took to get here. You need to know what came before the smile. Because it didn't start at the altar. It started with heartbreak, a baby on my hip, and a man who thought I was too broken to be loved. Let me tell you what happened. For a long time, I thought survival was the same thing as living. After Logan left, everything moved in slow motion. I was 26, with a newborn daughter, no college degree, and a pile of bills I could barely keep from drowning in. I worked double shifts at a corner diner, mornings pouring coffee for construction workers, evenings wiping ketchup off booths and folding half-used crayons into my apron. But even on the hardest days, when I could feel my chest tightening from exhaustion and self-doubt, I'd come home and see her face, Mila. She had Logan's eyes, wide, deep-set, almost too serious for a baby, but they softened when she looked at me, like she knew we were in this together. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in a building where the heat worked only when it felt like it. My bedroom had a lamp missing a shade, a mattress on the floor, and a framed photo of me and Mila from the hospital. That was it, but it was ours. People romanticize motherhood. They talk about magic and unconditional love, and yes, there's truth in that, but no one talks about the silence, the kind that creeps in when the baby's finally asleep and you're left alone with your thoughts. That silence used to eat me alive. I was still bleeding, figuratively and literally, when Logan walked out. We'd been high school sweethearts, the kind of relationship people called wild in a nostalgic way. He liked the thrill, the chaos. But when responsibility knocked, he ran, said he wasn't ready to be tied down, and in his version of events, I was the one who trapped him. His final words before slamming the door still ring in my head, "You'll never find anyone who wants a woman with a child." For a while I believed him. It's not that I didn't want love again, it's that I didn't think I deserved it. My mom, Donna, tried to pull me out of it. She's the kind of woman who doesn't waste time sugarcoating anything. When I told her I felt like I failed, she looked me square in the face and said, "You didn't fail. You got rid of someone who never deserved the best part of you." She started showing up once a week with bags of groceries and Mila-sized clothes she found on clearance. She'd pretend she was just in the neighborhood, but I knew she was checking in. Then there was my younger brother, Caleb. He's 6 feet tall, works as a mechanic, and has the emotional range of a golden retriever. He wasn't good at deep talks, but he always came by with frozen pizzas and dumb jokes. One night, after Mila had gone to bed, he told me, "You're doing great, Cece." Don't let that loser's voice live rent-free in your head. It helped. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Slowly, I stopped measuring my worth by how Logan saw me. I started showing up for myself the way I did for Mila. Still, dating felt impossible. I tried a few times. One guy ghosted me the minute I mentioned I had a daughter. Another said he respected the hustle but didn't want to play dad. It hurt more than I admitted out loud. So I stopped trying. My heart was on lockdown, and Mila became my universe. She grew fast, curious, smart, loud in the best way. She called me her best friend and told everyone in her pre-K class that her mommy could beat up bad guys. I started to believe I really could. We were doing okay. Not glamorous, not romantic, but safe. Until the day I met Elias. It was at Mila's school fundraiser. I was carrying a box of juice boxes and mini muffins when I felt someone take it out of my arms. I turned around, and there he was, tall with a soft smile and warm brown eyes. "You looked like you were about to drop that," he said. I gave him a polite smile, ready to say thank you and walk away. but Mila ran up and tugged on my shirt. "Mommy, who's that?" Elias knelt down to her level without hesitation and said, "Hi, I'm Elias. What's your name?" She grinned and shouted, "Mila!" before hiding behind my leg. He stood back up and looked at me, still smiling. "She's awesome." And for the first time in a long time, I felt something shift in my chest, a flicker of warmth, of possibility. I didn't know then that this man, this stranger with kind eyes, would be the one to rewrite everything Logan made me believe about myself. But I was about to find out. I didn't call it a date at first. After the fundraiser, Elias and I started talking more. Little things like bumping into each other at pickup time or chatting while waiting in the hallway. He volunteered at the school often. I later found out he was a pediatric nurse and had a soft spot for kids without strong father figures. I wondered if he could see that gap in Mila's life before I ever said a word. He never pushed, never pried, but he listened. To Mila, to me, to the quiet things I didn't know I was saying. The first time we had lunch, he brought 2 sandwiches and sat with me on a bench outside the school while Mila played. She climbed the monkey bars and shouted, "Mommy, watch this!" every 5 seconds. I kept apologizing for the interruptions, but Elias laughed every time. "I like that she wants to be seen," he said. "That means you've done something right." That sentence cracked something open inside me. I'd spent so long feeling like I was failing, like every missed bedtime story or microwave dinner meant I was coming up short. But here was this man, watching my daughter and seeing success instead of struggle. Still, I kept my guard up. I'd let it down once before, and it nearly destroyed me. Logan had a way of making you feel chosen right before he reminded you that you were disposable. That whiplash was something I never wanted to feel again. And yet, as weeks passed and Elias kept showing up, helping Mila with homework, fixing the broken cabinet door in my kitchen, sitting with me during the hard days, I felt myself leaning in. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was steady, kind, built brick by brick. But just as I started to believe this might be real, Logan came back. It started with a text, "Logan, still living in that rat trap? Need me to take Mila for a weekend?" I didn't respond. A week later, he showed up at my door unannounced. Mila wasn't home, thank God. He said he was in the area and wanted to grab an old box of his stuff I still had in the closet. I handed it to him without saying much. Then, just as he turned to leave, he paused in the doorway. "So, you seeing someone now? I heard from Jenna that you were playing house with some guy." I didn't answer. He smirked, leaning against the doorframe like he still owned the space. "You know none of that's real, right? He's just bored. No guy actually wants to raise someone else's kid. Sooner or later, he's gonna leave. They always do." I gripped the doorknob hard enough to make my palm ache. "You done?" I asked. He shrugged. "Just trying to help you wake up." Then he walked off, whistling like he hadn't just dumped poison into my chest. That night, I couldn't sleep. Elias called, asked if I was okay. I lied and said I was just tired. But the truth was, Logan's words had found the cracks in my confidence and wedged themselves in deep. What if he was right? What if this was all temporary? The next day, Elias showed up with donuts for Mila and coffee for me. He kissed my cheek and asked, "You sure you're okay?" I looked at him, really looked. His eyes weren't just kind, they were certain. He never made me feel like a backup plan or a charity case. He made me feel chosen. So I told him everything about Logan, about what he said, about the fear I couldn't shake. Elias didn't flinch. He just set down the coffee, took both of my hands, and said, "I'm not here out of pity, Sienna. I'm here because I love who you are, and I already love her. I don't need her to be mine by blood to be hers by choice." I cried harder than I had in years. That moment didn't erase the fear completely, but it gave me something stronger. Proof that love could be safe, that I wasn't unlovable, that Mila and I weren't just somebody's baggage. Still, in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that Logan wasn't done. And I was right. I always thought that big life changes happened like lightning, sudden, loud, impossible to ignore. But the moment I knew I was ready to choose love again wasn't loud at all. It was quiet. It was a Tuesday. Mila had fallen asleep on Elias's chest after dinner. We were sitting on my worn-out couch, the TV humming with an old cartoon she hadn't finished. Elias looked down at her and whispered, "I don't think I've ever felt this kind of peace before." And I knew right then that this wasn't just a relationship. This was home. And I wanted to build it, on purpose, with both hands, without fear. The next morning, I told Elias I was ready, that I wasn't just grateful for what he brought into our lives, I wanted him in it permanently. He didn't respond with a speech. He just pulled out a small box from his jacket pocket and said, "I was hoping you'd say that." He had been carrying it for weeks, waiting, hoping I'd find my own way to the same place he had already arrived. The ring was simple, a gold band with a small, radiant diamond, but what made my chest ache was Mila's name engraved inside, and mine, side by side. That night, I told Mila. I wasn't sure she'd understand the full weight of what it meant, but when I said Elias was going to be part of our family forever, she screamed and threw her arms around him. "Does this mean I get to keep him?" He smiled and said, "If you'll have me." The next few weeks were a blur of planning and disbelief. My mother was overjoyed, relieved, honestly. I think part of her had always worried that I'd close myself off from love forever. Caleb joked that Elias had to pass a background check and a Super Mario competition before he'd officially welcome him to the family. We decided on a small wedding. Nothing flashy, just the people who mattered. A chapel with sun-washed windows, soft music, and Mila as our flower girl. But even as joy settled into my bones, a quiet voice still whispered Logan's words from the past. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the peace to unravel. The trauma doesn't just vanish, it lingers, waiting for an open window. And that window opened the night before the wedding. I found an old journal while packing for the hotel. In it was a letter I had written to myself the night Logan left. It was messy, scrawled in anger and heartbreak, written in the dark while Mila cried in the next room. "I don't know if anyone will ever want me," I'd written. "I don't know if I'll ever trust someone again, but I have to keep breathing. I have to stay alive for her." I read that line 3 times. I sat on the edge of my bed and held that broken version of myself in my hands. I wanted to hug her, tell her it was going to be okay, that the love she didn't believe in was on its way, that she would one day wear a white dress and walk towards someone who saw every part of her and never once flinched. Instead, I tore the page out and ripped it in half. Donna walked in a few minutes later. She saw my red eyes and sat next to me without asking. "You're thinking about him, aren't you?" she said. I nodded. "He took a lot from you," she said, "but you still showed up. And tomorrow you're walking toward a man who gives without taking. Don't let the ghost of who hurt you sit in the front row of your happiness." That was the last time I thought about Logan that night, until the next morning. I was getting ready, my dress zipped halfway, when Donna walked into the bridal suite with a tense look. She was holding her phone, her lips pressed in a tight line. "He's here," she said. "Logan, back row, alone." For a moment, everything froze. The air felt thinner. But then Mila peeked around the corner, already in her little flower girl dress. She was twirling and giggling and holding the small white basket I'd let her pick out herself. I took a deep breath. Logan could sit wherever he wanted. He could watch. He could regret. But he wasn't the one waiting for me at the altar. The man who was, he wasn't looking at my past. He was waiting for our future. And I wasn't going to be late. The church smelled like lilies and old wood. Light filtered through the stained glass windows, painting soft colors across the pews. Everything felt still, sacred, like time had paused just for us. I stood behind the heavy wooden doors, my hand wrapped around Mila's. She looked up at me, wide-eyed and practically vibrating with excitement. "You ready, Mommy?" I wasn't sure if she meant the walk or the life that followed it, but I smiled and whispered, "Yeah, baby, I'm ready." Donna stood to the side, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Caleb gave me a wink, mouthing, "Breathe." The music began, gentle piano, the kind that somehow makes your whole chest swell, and the doors opened. Mila took the first step, tossing petals from her little basket like she was casting spells. Her curls bounced with every hop, and every face in the room melted into a smile. And then I saw him. Elias. He was standing at the altar in a slate gray suit, his hands clasped in front of him, eyes locked on mine. He didn't smile right away. He just looked, really looked, like I was something he'd been waiting to see his entire life. That should have been the only thing I noticed, but just behind the last row of guests, leaning against the far back pew, was Logan. No suit, no smile, just a sharp black jacket, his hands in his pockets, his jaw tight. He didn't look at Mila. He didn't look at Donna or Caleb. He only looked at Elias. There was something hollow in his expression, not rage, not sadness, just a kind of stunned disbelief, like the world he once controlled had gone on spinning without him. For a heartbeat, I froze, my feet rooted to the floor, my fingers curled tighter around the bouquet. I remembered all of it, his words, his voice, the way he made me feel like a burden instead of a blessing. And then Mila turned around at the end of the aisle, her little hand reaching for me. "Come on, Mommy," she called. "He's waiting." Just like that, I moved. Step by step, I walked toward the man who chose me with open arms instead of clenched fists. The man who saw a single mother and didn't flinch. The man who learned Mila's favorite bedtime story by heart and once stayed up all night sewing a button onto her favorite stuffed bunny because she cried when it broke. Elias stepped forward when I reached the front. He didn't wait for a cue. He took Mila's hand in one of his, then reached for mine. That moment felt like a photograph, forever suspended in light. Then, without a word, Elias knelt. Not to propose. That part had already happened. He knelt to Mila. "Mila Ray," he said gently, "I know I'm not your dad, but I love you like I am, and if you'll have me, I'd be honored to be yours, forever." She looked at me, eyes wide, then back at him. "Do I get to say yes?" He smiled. "You absolutely do." She nodded so hard I thought her head might fall off. "Yes." He stood and kissed the top of her head, then turned to me. "I've got both my girls now," he whispered. I didn't cry. I thought I would. I expected to. But instead, I smiled so hard it hurt. The rest of the ceremony blurred around the edges. I remember vows, rings, the warmth of Elias's hands in mine. I remember the kiss, the cheers, the way Donna clapped like she was at a concert and Caleb shouted, "Finally!" across the aisle. But mostly, I remember that look on Logan's face. He never said a word, never moved, just watched, like a man realizing he'd lost something he hadn't even known was worth keeping. I didn't look back again. Not during the walk down the aisle, not during the reception, not once. Because the truth is, that day wasn't about proving Logan wrong. It was about proving myself right, that I was worthy, that Mila and I were never baggage, that our love story didn't end when someone walked out. It started when someone walked in and stayed. The house was quiet. Mila had finally fallen asleep, curled up in her new pink pajamas, still wearing the plastic flower crown from the wedding. Elias had tucked her in while I washed my face, still stunned at how everything had actually worked out. I stood in the doorway of her room and just watched her breathe for a minute. I used to wonder what safety would feel like. Not the kind where you check the locks 3 times or double bolt your heart just in case someone tries to break in. I mean the kind where your shoulders drop without you realizing, where your breath doesn't feel like a task. That night, I finally understood. After she was asleep, Elias and I sat out on the back porch under a string of soft lights Caleb had helped put up. I was still in my wedding dress. He was in his shirt sleeves, his tie half undone. He reached over and took my hand, his thumb brushing over the ring. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. Better than okay. And I was. But it took time to get here. It took pain and doubt and disappointment. It took late nights alone with a crying baby and the voice of a man who tried to convince me I was ruined. That's the thing people don't tell you about healing. It doesn't always look like transformation. Sometimes it just looks like surviving one more day, holding on until the next morning, choosing not to answer the text, choosing not to believe the worst things someone once said about you. Logan didn't stay after the ceremony. He slipped out right after the vows, before the cake, before the dancing. I never saw him leave. And honestly, I didn't need to. Because I had already left him behind years ago, long before the wedding, long before the ring. The real goodbye had happened when I stopped letting his voice be louder than my own. I used to think I needed closure, some dramatic ending, a final confrontation where I'd say all the things I never got to say. But the truth is, closure doesn't always come from a conversation. Sometimes it looks like a little girl giggling as she dances on her stepdad's shoes. Sometimes it sounds like your mother saying, "I'm proud of you," without any hesitation in her voice. Sometimes it feels like lying in bed next to someone who reaches for your hand even in their sleep. That's closure. That's healing. At the reception, Caleb stood up to give a toast. I was bracing myself for something ridiculous. He once told a knock-knock joke at Grandma's funeral, but instead he raised his glass and said something I'll never forget. To the ones who stay, the ones who show up, the ones who pick up the pieces they didn't break and still choose to love every scar. To Elias, for being a real man. And to Sienna, for proving you don't need to be rescued to be loved. I cried then, harder than I had the entire day, because he was right. I didn't wait to be rescued. I rescued myself. I held it together when I thought I might fall apart. And I didn't just survive. I built something better. A home, a family, a future. Logan was wrong. Someone did want a woman with a child. But not just anyone. Someone strong. Someone kind. Someone who saw that Mila wasn't a burden. She was a gift. And that I wasn't broken. I was rebuilding. If you're watching this and you've ever believed the lie that you're too damaged, too complicated, too much, this is for you. You are not too much for the right person. You are not a second choice. You are not your past. You are the author of your next chapter. And sometimes the best part of the story starts after the person who never deserved you stops reading. So, yeah, Logan was there. But he didn't get to see a tragedy. He saw a miracle he walked away from. And I didn't wave. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just kept walking toward the life he said I'd never have. And finally stepped into the woman I was always meant to be. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own strength, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video if you believe healing is possible. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that their story isn't over. Comment below and tell me, what was your moment of turning point? I read everyone, and I'd love to hear yours. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. There's more real, raw, and honest storytelling coming. Stories that remind us we're never as alone as we think. Thanks for being here. Thanks for letting me tell this story. And remember, your past doesn't define you. How you